Welcome all of you. My name is Laura Steefel-Moore. I work at the Ringling in the education department, and I'm really excited today to be able to put two very different artists and artistic practices in dialogue with one another. These are artists who are represented in our Skyway exhibition that just opened. So if you haven't seen it yet, I've got to make a plug. It's wonderful. It'll be on view all summer, so you can come check it out. So what we're going to do is have each artist or artist collective present a little bit about who they are and the work that they do. And then we'll have a dialogue between all of the artists. And then of course, at the end, we will leave time for you to ask any questions you may have. But before we get started, I did want to make a land acknowledgement and then we'll begin the program. So the Ringling respectfully acknowledges that we are located on the traditional homelands and the ancestral territories of the Seminole Tribe of Florida and the Miccosukee Tribe of Indians of Florida, as well as the ancient tribes of the Calusa, Tocobaga, and Ujita peoples. We also acknowledge the local freedom-seeking community called Angola and the people later known as Black Seminoles. So again, thank you all for being here today. I'll ask that you stay on mute during the program just to keep the channels clear. If questions come up, feel free to share them via the chat. And then, like I said, we'll leave time at the end for your questions. So I'm really excited to turn it over to our artists, the reason that we're all here. Today we have Carrie Boucher with us, as well as OK Transmit, which is an artist collective, Mikhail, James, Olivia, and Greg, and they will be introducing themselves in just a moment. But first, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie to tell us a little bit about her work and her practice. So take it away, Carrie.
Thank you, Laura. All right, I'm going to share my screen here. All right, so if you've been to the Ringling, you might have noticed the big painted art bus on the grounds. If you haven't, it's hard to miss once you're there. And if you haven't been, I encourage you to go check it out. But I do have to say that the bus is there not as the piece of artwork that I'm bringing. The bus is there representing an idea and also a practice. And we are represented in the catalog by this photograph. So this photograph is connected to the bus that's sitting on the grounds. So I'm going to go back. My work is I come from a visual art background, and I also come from a very big family, and knew that if I was going to pursue my education and a career in the arts, it was something that, while my family is very supportive of the work that I do, I knew that I was going to have to figure out how to do it myself, as far as the financial side of it went. So my work is always and always has been around the found object. Once I paid for tuition and I was living in Chicago during art school, paid rent, paid all of my expenses. I didn't have a whole lot left for art supplies, which can be really expensive. So I was always looking for interesting visual scraps that have been discarded by our culture. And that's kind of the root of my visual artwork, is in taking what is generally discarded and turning it into something that has visual value or interest. So, and then again, this is right before I started NOMAD. I took a creative trip to Peru and stayed in a village there and didn't take any art supplies with me, knowing that I could find what I was going to create with in the jungle or in the village. And just by luck, they were digging trenches through the village to put, I think, drainage pipes or something like that in. And I found a vein of clay in one of the drainage ditches. And I started, I was like this crazy visitor who was like digging in their ditches, pulling clay out. And then the villagers started bringing me clay from the jungle and the riverbed, and so all of a sudden I had like really way more clay than I could use, and I was processing it, and it came time for me to leave, and I had processed more clay than I needed. And at the end of my stay, the night before I left, I knew I wasn't going to I didn't fire the pieces, because I didn't want to use the village's resources. Their firings take like 3 days. They do it a pit fire, and I didn't want the villagers to, use their resources for me to just do this creative exploration. So I went back to the studio I was working out of, and I brought all of my leftover clay, and the pieces that I had made, and I hung the pieces in the plaza. And the first people who were really interested in what was going on were the children. So the children gathered and wanted to engage with the pieces that I had put in the plaza. And you can see some of my pieces hanging from the trees behind the children. And at that point, I hadn't brought the clay down yet, but all of the kids were coming from all of the houses in the village. And I knew that I had processed more clay than I needed. And so I went to the studio and got the leftover clay that I wouldn't be using. And we just had this pop-up engagement. And I didn't know that this would be the root of my socially engaged practice, but I think this was the first time that I just popped up in art engagement with people I didn't know, just put the things in place. And, I didn't do it to teach. I didn't do it to share information. I just did it just for the joy of creativity and creative exploration. And that really is at the root of all of my work, this question of why, as humans, we create. And as a culture, we tend to really value and focus on creativity for trade. So, artists who make material things for people to buy, or dance companies who create an experience for people to buy a ticket to go to see, trading for things from goods and services to status, trading for currency and things like that. And that's all good and well. And, I'm not anti that, but I also know that as a human, I create for other reasons than that. And so I posed this question a few years ago on my really informal survey on social media, and asked people why they create. And I saw these themes. And people gave me answers like, they create because they want to process and understand their creativity, or to say that I'm here, or I've experienced this, or I'm part of this community. So I created this visual as, not comprehensive, but as the beginnings of my exploration of human creativity and why we create. So I'm going to talk quickly about a couple of my projects, NOMAD Studio and Spacecraft. So in Skyway, NOMAD Studio is represented, and in short, we call it NOMAD, which is an acronym for Neighborhood-Oriented Mobile Art and Design. And in NOMAD, we have 4 parts: NOMAD Art Bus, the Group Children's Homes, Justice Studio, and Neighborhood Outreach. So generally, the most people know about NOMAD through our NOMAD Art Bus. It's the way that we're out in the community, spreading the word about the things that we do. It's the most visually striking and memorable part of our organization. So often NOMAD is represented by the NOMAD Art Bus. And on campus, it's painted by me, but generally it's painted by the community. And again, this is why people remember it. The scale of being able to paint without the edges of the paper getting in the way. And we don't put any time limits on people painting, so kids can paint for 2 hours if they want to paint. And then we do have a hashtag well-loved wheels, and you can check that out. We've been collecting images of the wheels as people have painted them over the years, which is a lot of fun. But as we were doing our work and getting out into the community, we realized that really what we wanted to do was prioritize communities that have been impacted by structural inequities. And in that work, that being out in the community in that way led Group Children's Homes to reach out to us. And so we started going to Group Children's Homes. It's our longest running program. We've been doing it since 2015. And we're going there, again, just for the pure joy of creative exploration. And one of the things that I discovered kind of being a scrappy young art student was that the freedom that art gave me to envision a future for myself that wasn't going to be possible unless I did it. And so that's one of the things I like to share with kids, is the idea that, you have the freedom to create your future. And going to art school taught me how to dream big, how to execute an idea on budget and on time, and share it with the world. And then there's a lot of overlap between our group homes and our Justice Studio program, which is at the Pinellas Regional Juvenile Detention Center. And when we're in there, we always ask the kids on the left there, there's a comparison between the art program and the mod, and the mod is where they live during the day, asking them why they come back. And that's one of the questions I always ask them is, it's an optional program and yet they keep returning. And to get teenagers to keep returning to a program is pretty remarkable. So we're always interested in what it is about the program that keeps them coming back. And they also individually and privately share their roses and thorns. They do give us permission to share them. So they write them privately, but I never share them unless we've gotten permission to share them. And neighborhood outreach. And I'm going to try to just buzz through the rest of this really quickly. So neighborhood outreach, generally we're engaging with programs like schools, after school programs, camps, and children's programs. But what happens when all of those things get shut down? The children don't go away. You know, there's still the need out there. But last year with COVID, all of those programs were shut down. And so what we did is we looked at where our artists live, and the artists who were living in communities that were impacted by structural inequities, we paid them to pop up art camps in their front yards, in parking lots near their houses, in schools and places like that. So we got art out into the community and art programming out into the community. Despite the fact that everything else was shut down. And I am going to go back one. This is the team who we've been working with over the past year. I have a much bigger team than this. And then included in this team are my teammates who work with me on spacecraft. And our support team includes Olivia, who is present in this room, and Emily and Avery. And spacecraft is also a project with an acronym, Social Practice Activating Creative Environments. I'm not going to go into this. I'm running low on time. So spacecraft, though, is a project out of shipping containers. And we travel Pinellas County over the course of 2 years for deployments on the themes of make, play, read, and grow. And you can check spacecraft out at explorespacecraft.com.
Carrie, thank you so much for that whirlwind tour of everything that you do. And I'm sure we're all looking forward to digging in more and hearing more about each of these projects. I think to our audience, we're going to hold questions for the artists until the conversation part. So I'm going to jump right over to OK Transmit and have them introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their work.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having us today. We're elated to be able to discuss our practice, our group, and the artwork that we created for this year's Skyway. And so I'm Olivia. This is Greg Perkins.
Kyle Manchin.
James Kern.
And collectively, we're OK Transmit. This is one iteration of our group. OK Transmit is a group that started as a meetup back in 2018. And we're about 180 strong. So when the call for artists went out for Skyway, we pull out the call to our group and asked who wanted to participate in this call and create an artwork. And this is the folks that that emerged, and we're excited that future open calls will have this iteration or a different iteration of the group. And we'll definitely chat a little bit more about the group and how it started and kind of where we're at now. But the meetup kind of morphs into artist talks and exposing the community about art and technology, about the leading edge things that are happening, also educating about the things that have happened in the past that are now informing what we're creating. And it came out of like a need in the community of kind of seeing that art and technology is kind of spurring all of this innovation throughout the world. And then we wanted it to happen as well here in St. Petersburg, Florida. So that's kind of how it started. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about it, but we wanted to share, before we kick this off, we wanted to show the video of the artwork Overflow that OK Transmit has created. So let's see.
Okay, so that's a snapshot of our piece. Credit to Greg for making a great video documentation of the work. So, what are we seeing here and hearing as well is it's a kinetic sculpture, and it's generative sonically. We focused quite literally when the Skyway came to the overall. We responded to that with sort of literally taking the Skyway Bridge as our kind of topic, and we really liked that topic because it symbolized a lot of things. It was there were a lot of puns as well. bridging practices. It's bridging communities, and so we felt that that was interesting enough to run with, and we thought of all the ways that we could kind of make an intervention or kind of use this as a site-specific material. And so that's what we did, and we did it in a way that could speak to the collective's practice in the this iteration of who came together to produce the work. So the piece really involves everything from writing code to building a sculpture to sound and also site specificity and all the sort of conceptual ends to that as well. What it's doing is it's accessing the live camera feeds that the state of Florida maintains on the Skyway Bridge, and we consume that video, and we develop code that analyzes the traffic in real time, and then generates a soundscape from the flowing traffic on the right-hand and left-hand side of the bridge, northbound and southbound. And that also then influences this sort of abstract representation, sculptural representation of the bridge by sort of pulling on the kind of triangular sections and string, which are kind of raising and lowering based on the amount of traffic at any given time. So it's kind of a living sculpture that is kind of has an indexical relationship to the bridge at any given moment. And it becomes kind of a social practice in a way, because all of us, even in going to back and forth from the museum, we all kind of enter into the work at one point or another. So it's kind of interesting that it can sort of have this living embodiment of these connected spaces. So we found that very interesting. So I'll speak to this one well.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, just this is some snapshots of our sketching process. OK Transmit really, in discussion with our groups, host a lot of artists who talk about how their practice kind of converges with art, technology, design, science, and coming from many different disciplines. So when we kind of work together as a group, there's a lot of sketching and iterating. We follow, a design process, and we look at a lot of like reference material. So in the beginning, that really started out as sketching in sound and sketching on paper, and also what we call hardware sketching or sketching in code. So all these just become materials of our practice, just like wood or metal, code and sound are kind of similar in that vein. So these are just some early sketches of how we wanted to sonify or sort of make an instrument representation of what the bridge was kind of symbolizing, as well as an early render there at the top.
There's an image too of what it actually looks like.
Oh yeah, and to the top right-hand side of the screen here is a snapshot of what those camera feeds look like on the Skyway Bridge. And there are quite a few, so we also looked through many different sort of views and angles and perspectives until we kind of found one that really served and worked for what we were doing. Yeah.
I think I can,
Yeah.
We'll talk about some of it later.
Okay. Yeah, right. Awesome. Perfect.
Okay, and then as the design continued, we evolved that into 3D model, and we used CAD to kind of design the sculptural elements, and that started to introduce electronics and other components that needed to make the sculpture kinetic. And so this is kind of what it looks like as sketches evolve into more refined designs that we then fabricate. So, and this was fabricated also by us. We used a 3D printer to print the 3D parts. We had to break it into sections and then glue it together because the printer only has so much volume that it can produce, and then integrate electronic components and then program those components to work as sort of an orchestration of the whole experience.
Okay.
Software. So with this, we chose the visual programming environment processing, which is pretty popular, and it's very easy to use to get up and running. And there are a lot of different third-party libraries that are easily integrated. So for this piece, we chose to use one called OpenCV, which allowed us to discern the cars from the bridge, which is like the trick that we're doing here, is find the cars, or do our best effort to find something that could be a car, draw a line around it, take those coordinates, and then extract that and then scale it up to a much larger canvas. So we're drawing both on the source image and on the projection on the right. Yeah, 3D computer vision techniques is what we use for that. And as we extracted that data and drew the boxes around the cars, that became the input for transmitting of that data. So there are a number of things that we do here where we're taking the XY coordinates and sending them to 2 different locations. We're sending it to an application that produces the sound, and it has a couple of different effects. It will modulate some effects that make the underlying drone sound darker or brighter, depending on the number of cars that are there, but also triggers the kind of wind chiming piano sounds you hear as cars ascend or descend the span. We also send that data to sculpture, which, depending on the number of cars that are either on the northbound or southbound span, will influence the amount of tension and the height of the 2 triangles. You mind if I add one thing? You should note also in this sketch, you see horizontal lines that run on the left-hand side of the panel. That's where the piano notes are being triggered, the wind chime-like tone. So we created these zones, and then we just sort of erased those lines to have these sort of trigger zones to break up the image more so. And I will commend James.
tremendous programming effort here. And it's really, I'm surprised, frankly, having seen these things before, how seamless this works. It's a remarkable, I'm in awe of the programming that goes into the backside of it.
Beautiful. And the creative coding as well, right? The visualization of that code. Sonification.
Sure. So, my background, first from MFA in multimedia. However, prior to that, I was a musician. I was a big fan of John Cage and found sound. Using the idea of using found sound as music, and there's really no difference between the two. So when it came to talking to these guys about how do you create sounds for, creating sort of tonality about going over a bridge, I literally took our old car. I think it had 4 microphones inside, and just drove over the bridge and recorded at all these speeds, which created a sort of drone. So if you're in the gallery or in that video, you can hear the sort of low drone piece. It's cueing on, I can't remember which speed I took it at. I think it's 55. But essentially what you're looking at there is a equalizer showing you those little yellow tabs are sort of where it's peaking. And then I essentially pulled a scale that was as close to those frequencies as possible. And then that scale is then translated into those piano notes that you hear kind of over the top. So in a lot of ways, the base layer of the audio itself is generated by physically moving over the bridge, started trying to replicate the experience of driving over the bridge. I know sort of the idea, I think, from the beginning changed from this idea of a more stressful audio track to a much more ethereal one, which I think we landed on at the end. I think in some ways also, after the pandemic, we didn't need more doom, right? There's a little bit of uplift in sort of thinking about the potential of reinterpreting the bridge in these other ways, to, I think, collectively more important. And so in many ways, that what you're looking at there is sort of the base frequency spectrum, which then generated basically the key in which you hear all the piano. The drone is pretty much constant. It has some effects on it, but it's more or less fairly what you would hear from the car.
And that's just an image of the piece as well. And I think what's really exciting about it is that it's bringing, everybody's expertise together, and it's showcasing talent and the power of collaboration, the power of community. And we're just grateful for the Ringling for giving us such a beautiful space to exhibit it as well. And I think, and I think that's it. Yeah.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm loving how seemingly different these two projects are, but I think there's actually some really interesting similarities that hopefully we can tease out in our conversation. And I just wanted to say thank you too. It's so incredibly complicated what you've done here, but then when you're actually experiencing the work of art, it's very calming and almost meditative. And so it's so interesting to hear all that went into it. And then how the experience of the visitor is maybe just, it's so relaxing. So I'm going to turn it over to both of you. And I know we have some questions in the audience as well. But my first question relates to this idea of sort of responding specifically to input from the community as shaping both of your practices. For both of your works, the art you are creating is really informed by input, right, from a very specific location or group of people. So for OK Transmit, my first question is for you. You talked a little bit about why the bridge made sense as a choice. It relates to the title of the exhibition, those great metaphors about bridging and making connections. But I'm curious, have you done other work that is directly informed by sites like that, sites of transportation? And is your work often informed by real-time data input from a specific area or place? Or was this something sort of new for you?
Yeah, so I know we're a group of kind of different, we've all done sort of different things in our backgrounds. And I know some of us have done work like that. I personally have as well created data sculptures. I don't know if there's a great sort of easy term for it. I often sort of like transmission is kind of topically appropriate in the group. well, not only about sort of sharing and inputs and outputs, but also literally when you're kind of using new technology that can network and communicate across the globe. I find that really interesting. And so, yes, past works have involved creating sensors and putting them into the environment and extracting out some interesting phenomena, whether that be wind, waves, or other types of actually earthquakes at one point, and transmitting that into some form of sculpture or experience for the purposes of like connecting audiences to the events that are happening in their world and in real time, but that we might not sort of feel the impacts of. And I've always found that when you can viscerally experience something, you get a much richer kind of appreciation or emotional kind of response to like it's very different to read a story about something happening in the world and kind of intellectually understand that, but maybe not emotionally connect to it. So it seemed like a powerful medium to connect audiences in deeper ways.
Yeah, I again in my own artistic practice a number of years ago credited both an iOS and an Android application for a very large art park in North Carolina, which is about 170 acres on the grounds of North Carolina Art Museum, and basically created an application where we, a collaborator and I, different collaborative, created audio samples for each geological or geographical location. They were sort of identified by GPS locators. And then the audience would just basically download the app and be able to walk through the park, and we had created a score for this entire experience, this entire landscape. So when you entered the woods, the birds would come on. I mean, it was really fairly robust and imaginative and very nonlinear. So in some ways, using the community, that the only reason you would hear anything is because you were there, right? You can't experience it elsewhere. So this idea of like music as it attaches to landscape in specific ways, it's sort of where I plugged in, I think, to some extent. This idea of the indexical relationship in that past work of the individual to the score they're hearing kind of is somehow flipped here, not in some mathematically symmetrical way, but I think there's a sense or spirit of that kind of thing, where we're just sort of taking data from this bridge, sonic data, and then putting it back into this larger conceptual framework, which we could then manipulate into this kind of experience. Again, sort of using cars to activate, right? I think that's kind of what was clearly, I guess that would be the connection point, right? Mm-hmm. There's kinds of musical experience.
So it's very human driven in that sense.
Yeah.
It's not just a natural phenomenon. So I think that was new for me personally, is this was people's movement, and the idea of movement. It's very interesting because we spend a lot of energy, moving around this world, and it's kind of poetic. Like, I think we framed it in a very poetic way, because like somehow freedom is attached to movement too, and it just felt, I don't know, and with the pandemic and everything, as we thought more deeply about that, at first we really thought about the tension of the bridge as a tensional structure, and then getting through COVID and all of that, movement became much more important as a topic.
And kind of weirdly, I think we want the soundtrack to be more liberating, right? To actually be further than a mile from your house, right?
Exactly.
This idea of actually traveling somewhere should have some joy attached.
Yeah, right? Like you're getting to cross the bridge.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
Not transgressive. Yeah.
Right.
Right. That's right.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. So I want to pick up on this idea of human input and output and this visceral experience and throw it to you, Carrie. I'm realizing before we talk more about your practice, can you define for our audience in a nutshell, what does it mean to say you are a social practice artist? And then from there, if you can talk a little bit about the importance of honoring the communities that you work with and how you do that so deliberately.
Sure. So broadly, like any genre of art, like how can you define it? But just social practice is some of the themes around social practice are getting outside of the museum or gallery setting, participatory open participation with the public. So it's not just participatory, like you could buy a ticket to participate, but it is, and that's one of the things that makes it really unpredictable in a way, is that you are not orchestrating this. You are opening up, and we as a community are creating the engagement together. And with that, as far as honoring the community, as soon as you start working in the community, I mean, again, my background, I come from a fine art background. So I had to let go a lot of what I was trained in art school around the material product that happens at the end of the energy that goes into the work, being, having control over the aesthetic material object at the end of it, and also just the environment in general. But one of the things also that I lean on from that background is the idea of an iterative process, and doing it, looking at it, thinking about it, what went well, what was problematic, who was included, who was excluded, and how every time we do it, can we improve upon the work that we did. So the slide that I showed you of us asking questions of the kids inside the juvenile detention center, while that does sometimes help with things like grants, that's not why we're doing it. We're doing it so that we ask that question on Tuesday, so that when we go in again Thursday, that Thursday session is better than the Tuesday session. And we keep improving real time with the public that we're working with. So, and things like access, and making sure that there aren't barriers to access. And barriers to access can be, a lot of times people think if you have a program that's free, you've eliminated all of the barriers to access, but you have not. There are so many barriers that, transportation access, and children whose parents don't have time to bring them to a place. And in that way, we eliminate registration processes. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of people in offices with, all of people probably shudder at the idea that we just open things up to kids in the neighborhoods and say, come and join, and you don't have to pay, and your parent doesn't have to sign any paperwork. We don't have to know who you are. And that part of that happened when we were working in a community with a high immigrant population, and people, some people don't want their name on a piece of paper. Some people don't want any record of even being in a place. And so that's one of the things that we try to keep in mind, is making sure that the engagement in every way from the start is people gain a sense of belonging. You are supposed to be here. This is for all of us. And this is, there is no, it's an ecosystem when we're all contributing. So it's not, while we are structured as a public charity, I don't consider the work that we do charity. I consider it an ecosystem of sharing resources. Some people have financial resources and they contribute to allow us to do it. Some people have the experience and the art materials to bring. And some people have the interest and the excitement and the joy, and they want to bring that. And we're all creating this beautiful thing together. There's no hierarchy in it. So that's, I don't know if I answered the first question that you asked, but.
No, that was great. And I'm loving how this to me feels a lot like a collective, like an artist collective. It's you and the community and the kids and the parents and the creatives. And so I want to go back to something that OK Transmit mentioned, talking about how through the pandemic and through COVID, it became increasingly important for your work to be about crossing the bridge, about going somewhere, how you changed your soundtrack to be more soothing. We didn't need any more stress. So I want to come back to you all in a minute, but Carrie, while I've got you, how did COVID impact your practice, which is so contingent on face-to-face interactions with people in the community? And you alluded to that a bit in your presentation, but can you talk a little bit more about those challenges?
Yeah. So like I said, we generally, before COVID, would engage in our neighborhood outreach through other programs, after school programs, youth programs. And then all of that shut down. And we realized that this was a time when the need is greater and the access is less in all ways. We have less access to the folks in the community. They have less access to programming. But how do we solve that? So basically what we did was we took a map. We took a survey of our artists and where they lived. And we took a map that was put out by Policy Link on pockets of poverty in Pinellas County. And we overlaid those two maps and we looked at which artists live closest or in the neighborhoods that are most impacted by poverty. And we hired those artists to pop up the camps in their neighborhood. And part of the reason we did that was to get programming to the families, because we knew that they wouldn't have the resources to look for alternatives. Another reason was because we wanted to make sure that artists who all of a sudden, many of them are gig workers, all of a sudden they have no income. But also we wanted to be mindful of not spreading this virus that, at that time, we didn't know how it was being spread. So what we wanted to do, generally, Nomad Art Bus goes out and encourages everybody from everywhere to come and engage. And we did the opposite with the micro camps. We didn't publish where we were having these micro camps. They were on our social media, but we didn't let anybody know locations, because what we wanted to do was keep everybody in their neighborhoods. These are people who are already engaging with each other at the playground all day long. And, we weren't introducing any new people into a place. And so that's how we felt was the most appropriate way for the engagement to continue.
Thank you so much. So going back to OK Transmit, it's kind of the same question for you. How did the pandemic impact your working practice? And I'm also just curious about, how did you go about divvying up who did what? And I know you sort of alluded to your different backgrounds and specialities, but what does it mean to work as a collective? How do you get things done? I know doing things by committee can always be tricky. So how do you do it so successfully?
Yeah, do you want me to keep going?
I'll just say one thing. I think that the length of time, because we had never worked before, the fact that the exhibition was delayed a little bit helped us in this way, because we sort of had one pass at it, and then so we set it down, and when we came back to it, we all had fresh eyes in this way. I thought it was a really great two-part process, which is totally unusual for exhibitions like this. You think it's a specific timeline, and here's your opening date. And when it was scuttled last summer, right, we were all just like, all right, I guess I'll see you in, I don't remember what date we set, but we sort of just came back together. And I think that the thing you see now is a much more mature, in some ways, version of what we had originally planned.
Yeah, we were like different people then.
Yeah.
And I think I'll like to even take it back a little bit. So Mikhail and I met at the University of Tampa in an art and technology class. That's where we met. And then that's where we met Greg as well. He was one of our advisors and professors. And we always knew we wanted to work together, because the things this man knows, and just he's so intelligent, so capable. We were just like, we're going to work with him one day. We didn't realize it would be now, but and then when Mikhail and I started OK Transmit in 2018, with this vision of bringing art and technology, of demystifying art and technology, of making it accessible, of bringing the community in, of saying, yes, like a technologist looks very, can look like anyone. An artist can be anyone. You can self-identify, like that's so. And then that's where we met James. James came to one of our meetups, and then it just was like so beautiful and so much synergy. And as a collective, so my background is in higher education, in business and entrepreneurship, and in communications. So I'm all about supporting entrepreneurs, pushing people, like, let's do it, like, let's dream bigger, like, let's go. And I'm also really good at organization and emailing people and communicating. So I like being kind of the glue in the group, and then sharing with people, like, look at this incredible work. Look how you can be included. Look, you can come. And so that's kind of like my personal involvement.
Yeah, and I think that's the function of to do, and we try to help people learn this when we engage with them in the meetups that we host, we always try to figure out how it is we can like access new media tools and technologies, and B, how to execute at kind of a higher level of fidelity through sort of a collective vision. And that could sort of lead to anything, like if you wanted to create a company or a business. We're pretty business minded in that sense, and actually we are, like, part of our collaboration is a business. We right here, James, myself, and Olivia, are actively building Fairgrounds, which is a new immersive arts company here in St. Pete. So we see each other quite regularly, and then we see Greg as well quite regularly. So I think we just are in a pattern. Also in the technology world, there's maybe more predisposed to being able to, work remotely. It's sort of been ingrained in, I think, some of us in terms of like doing software development. You often kind of work in collaboration with others in a distributed way, where you're sort of contributing code and then uploading that code to the cloud, and then someone else pulls down the code that you've written and adds to it in kind of an aggregate fashion. So I think a lot of that sort of informs our practice as well. But we try to like actively show people who are unfamiliar with those kinds of tools how to do that as well. So we do a lot of like workshops. I think workshops have been kind of the format of our collective, and creative coding workshops as well. We work with the Suncoast Developers Guild, which is a really great program that allows people to, within a very short time frame, learn to code basic websites and put applications together. And so they're doing a great sort of outreach. So we sort of gravitate towards the groups and places that are making technology accessible, and then find ways to kind of communicate through those vehicles and those lenses. I forgot what the original question was.
I did too, but that was really helpful and insightful. Thank you.
One aspect of the question was, how do we divide the work? How do we delineate who did what? And it really was just who wants to work. Like, here are the parts we think. Who wants to work on this? We lean on our strengths in certain cases. Initially, so this isn't really a COVID-related change, but there was a pretty big change with regard to how we approach the work, where initially the Florida Department of Transportation would provide still images, so just JPEGs, and our approach was to snag them, store them, maybe do something with AI or data, big data, to do some analysis on it. And then between when we put it down, when we picked it back up, they changed the feed to video. So we had to be pretty flexible and find a new way to, and I think the piece is better off as a result.
Yeah.
It did present itself like a collective programming challenge.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, okay, I guess I'm gonna, just because my audio is sort of more my space. James is a very strong coder. Mikhail's a great 3D, a great fabricator, and also sort of like sensors and sculptures, right? This idea of physical computing, or the world of things, right? Or the world of what's called the world of Internet of Things.
Internet.
Yeah.
Right. So it sort of it was fairly organic. I've known these guys for a while. I knew James for about a year and a half now. So I guess we all knew we all kind of knew where each other was at.
A lot of when we put it out to our group, and we were always sort of extending the invitations. I think I don't know. We all travel in different circles and worlds, and sometimes it's mysterious how to present a work at like a Ringling museum, and sometimes it feels like you have to go through a very specific route to do such things. Maybe it's more academic arts route, but in another discipline, it's just as mysterious. Like, we engage with a lot of scientists as well, from like USF and sort of marine science locations, and their practices also seem mysterious. And how do you kind of work in those networks as well? And when we get people sort of coming to our groups and presenting their practice, a dialogue forms, and then it suddenly kind of dawns on people that they can collaborate in interesting ways. And so we've had PhD historians starting to use GIS data, geographical information systems, and find a new modality for storytelling that was more compelling. And those synergies are hard. You can't anticipate them, but I think where it starts is by kind of getting people together and sharing ideas openly. So that's sort of the premise of it.
I think a lot of what's kind of not seen here, and I think Mikhail makes the point very well. When I was in graduate school, I was at Wisconsin. They have a very nice, big and fairly robust engineering program. And I always said to the department chair, why don't you guys just put like one MFA and one engineering master's student together and see what happens? Yeah. Interestingly, this is kind of what the results are. But, I think science is always in there somewhere, particularly when it comes to the amount of math that goes into so much of this coding and computer vision. When you look at it, it's very much in the middle of creativity and technology are very much in that scientific space.
Yeah, I'm struck by how both. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Carrie.
I was just going to say, I read this book that was really great for me to read in the beginning of my, organizing, and it's called Reinventing Organization. And it's basically, it talks about how you get the best work when everybody's doing what they love doing. When everybody's passionate about their work, you might not be able to say this is what we're going to do, but together we create an even better thing. So that's what it's sounding like to me, and that's very much the way that I try to run things at NOMAD. If you absolutely are passionate about what you're doing and you're working with other people who are, you're going to do some great work.
Yeah, I'm so struck by how both of you are really breaking down barriers. You're making your practice so accessible, whether it's art and technology or, democratizing creativity, Carrie. And so I think it's so wonderful to see those intersections. I realize I have not let our audience ask any questions. I've been hogging all of your time and attention. So I want to open it up to them. Audience, if you want to unmute and ask a question or share one via the chat, feel free to do that. And as I'm giving you a moment to sort of get your questions queued up, we did have a question from Ingrid. Carrie, how many buses are there?
There is just the one bus right now. And I think that's all I can handle right now. But, we've dreamed about having a bus for every different kind of medium or something like that. But right now there's just the one bus, which is our second bus.
So if anyone would like to ask a question, Melissa, do you have a question?
Yes, I have a question about the bridge piece. Was there any consideration taken for a traffic jam or possibly a freighter being included in the bridge? Or what happens when the bridge is closed? Do the sensors pick up birds or do they just stop working?
Well, so the code will attempt to find objects that are of a certain size that are different from previous blue frames. So while we haven't seen any birds get sonified or anything, one thing that was pretty interesting, and I didn't realize this until we had the piece running, because we stress tested and made sure it would run for days. And while observing it, I saw the entire frame just shift over. I didn't realize that they were pan tilt zoom cameras. So the Department of Transportation has the ability to move the cameras at any time. And they usually go back to the home location. But when that happened, it was pretty chaotic because the directionality of everything, it felt like someone was really dizzy and on drugs or something. It was just, everything was everywhere. It was a really fun experience.
It's psychedelia mode.
Yeah.
And the night of the day of the opening, or the artist opening on Friday, apparently when people are doing construction on the bridge and they have workers in the sort of side lanes, they've been putting up that safety fence, the operators of the cameras will zoom in on the workers, probably just the safety protocol to keep an eye on people. And so they had sort of trained it closely on the workers, and and I think the computer vision code was sort of boxing in the workers and sort of finding them as, additional moving objects on the bridge and triggers to the piece as well.
And then the sound was different. So it was a whole different environment of you're just seeing these workers, and then the whole environment shifted. So that was a huge surprise.
So in the spirit of how when you collaborate with others, you do sort of relinquish control, and that's interesting.
It's really interesting. It also changes between day and night because the types of objects that get picked up with computer vision algorithm are different. You'll get it focusing on headlights because that's what stands out against the background instead of the cars themselves. And then, this was intentional, but also rush hour looks sounds different from, early morning or late at night.
Great question, Melissa. Thank you. I know, Carrie, we had another question in the chat that came through a little bit earlier is where do you get support for your outreach efforts? So maybe if you want to address that, and then we'll give people an opportunity again if anyone else wants to share questions via the chat or ask them.
From anywhere that will, no, we're kind of selective about where our support comes in. Again, just trying to make sure that it's in alignment with what we believe in. Most of our support comes in from individuals. So we are a 501c3. We're a nonprofit, so people can donate to us and get a tax deductible donation if that's what they're interested in. But it is generally individuals who are donating a lot of times, $3, $25, $50, $100 a month. And then we do occasionally get grants from county and foundations and things like that. But most of our work is supported by individuals.
All right, other questions from our audience for our fabulous artists? Melissa, do you have another one?
Yeah, I have a question for Carrie.
Okay.
How do you go from being a free-spirited artist, so to say, as the stereotype, not allowing the edges of the paper to kind of box you in, to spending a lot of time working with the government and bureaucracy and red tape with all your programs?
So, oh my goodness, thank you. The way that I look at it, okay, so really early on when I was thinking about starting this organization, I went to some institutions. I went to larger entities in the area, and I said, I have this idea, and everybody, now I understand as an organization, when you have your thing going, you have enough on your plate. But I wasn't finding the something else, something bigger to house it under. So I knew that if it was going to happen, I was going to have to do it. And I don't have a background in business. I was a studio artist my whole life, and I realized that, if there's one thing that I know how to do, it's to execute a piece of artwork. So I look at my organization as my artwork. And with any artwork, with any process, there are the parts of it that you love, and there are the parts of it that you just get through so that you can do the thing. So, as an oil painter, I didn't love cleaning my brushes at the end, but I knew that if I didn't do that, they wouldn't be ready to go the next time I painted. Or I didn't necessarily love wedging my clay or things like that. But that's when I'm in those moments, interfacing with entities that I don't necessarily agree with or that I'm having frustration with. To me, I look at it as like, this is the part of my art practice that is the not so fun part that allows me to do the fun parts. And one day I would really love if NOMAD is able to stick around long enough and grow enough that somebody else can be doing the administrative side of things so that I can return to the programming and just hang out with teenagers and do artwork in rooms and things like that. But right now, I'm the person doing that. So.
And Carrie, we had a question about will the bus be open on campus? So we were remiss in not sort of sharing about the programming that will be happening during the time of the exhibition. Do you want to provide an overview of that?
Yeah, so the bus is on campus and will be there until August 20th, I believe. You can go and look at the bus. We do have a program happening on Family Day, which is August 2nd on a Monday. And we will be doing community bus painting all day on campus on that Monday, August 2nd. So that'll give you the opportunity to engage with the bus more in the way that we generally engage out in the community. The inside of the bus, a lot of people are really curious about the inside of the bus. I might post a picture of it on our social media just to kind of get people, everybody wants to look inside the bus. And what I say is it looks like an art teacher's closet that has experienced many earthquakes. So it's, art supplies everywhere. So the bus itself will not be open, but if you come on Family Day and you kind of give me a little nudge, I might let you run up the stairs and check it out inside.
And we should mention too, you will be doing facilitating a micro camp at the Sarasota Housing Authority in one of our Newtown neighborhoods, and that will be happening every Saturday in July. Thanks to one of our very generous donors and supporters at the museum. So a lot of really exciting things. I wanted to give space if there were any last questions. I know we're just about at time here, but any last questions or comments for our artists?
I think I'll just do a plug for our meetup if I can.
Yeah.
Everyone to join. If you go to meetup.com /OKTransmit, or you just Google OKTransmit Meetup. We encourage you to, it's free to join, and you can just become a member and stay in tune of all of the different talks that we'll have. We'll have artist talks, and we have some exciting programming to demystify NFTs coming up, which we're very excited about. And we just invite everybody to come and learn with us. So, yeah.
All right, well, with that, I want to thank you all so much. And thank you especially to our artists. Wonderful work. You've got to get out to this exhibition and see. It's incredible. We do have a second artist discussion, same time, same place next week, next Tuesday at 10:30 with 3 new artists. So I hope you'll be able to join us for that. And again, thank you all so much. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Bye.